This is Strategic Historian Vellin speaking to the Inquiry Board of the Dominion High Command. What follows is my testimony regarding Operation Dawn Shield, regarding Earth, regarding what we found there, what found us. You've asked me to explain why 5,000 ships entered the Sol system, and why only this recording returned. I will try, but language fails when describing the moment a predator realizes it has become prey. Words are tools for shared understanding, and what I understand now, you cannot yet comprehend. The operation began as they all do, with certainty. Humanity earned their designation as Category Gamma Rising not through technology. They'd barely escaped their own gravity well, but through trajectory. Our predictive algorithms modeled them as future peer competitors within 800 years, not through advancement, through volatility, emotional decision-making, irrational persistence. Our xenopsychology department labeled it malignant optimism. They meant it as diagnosis. In retrospect, it reads like prophecy. The Dominion prunes threats before they mature. Early intervention, humane integration. I believed Earth would be our most ethical conquest, a mercy extended to children playing with fire. Save them from themselves, save the galaxy from them. I drafted the operation's opening transmission myself. Today we prevent tomorrow's war. I was proud of that line. I added it to my personal archive of contributions to galactic peace. The briefing lasted 4 hours. Commander Thex stood before the assembled fleet captains, his posture radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong. He projected images of human cities, primitive architecture, chaotic governments, infrastructure held together with hope and happenstance. He showed us their wars. So many wars, against themselves for resources they could have shared, over ideas they could have debated. Trenches filled with the young. Cities erased in atomic fire. The same cycles, repeated across centuries as if they'd learned nothing. They are children, Thex said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, playing with fire. We are the adults, come to take away the matches before they burn down the house. Every captain nodded. I nodded. We believed we were preventing suffering. We believed we were saving the galaxy from a future catastrophe. We never asked the obvious question. What if the children had already learned to swallow the flame? 5,000 ships. Enough firepower to glass a planet 3 times over, crack it open like an egg, scatter its remains across the void. We translated to hyperspace with surgical precision, emerged at the edge of the Sol system in perfect formation. That's when the universe stopped making sense. Earth turned below us. Blue water covering most of its surface, white clouds drifting in patterns that suggested weather systems, green and brown continents scattered like birthmarks across its skin. Our sensors confirmed everything: breathable atmosphere, active weather. Operational power grids drawing electricity from their sun, from splitting atoms, from burning ancient compressed life. No life signs, not extinct, not dead. Simply absent, as if 10 billion people had stood up from their desks simultaneously and walked away, leaving everything running. Commander Thex broke the silence with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Perhaps they saw us coming and hid in their cellars. The bridge crew laughed. Nervous laughter, the kind that Phil's space fear wants to occupy. I watched the energy signatures instead, cities blazing with power, traffic systems cycling through their rhythms. Radio towers broadcasting carrier waves with no content, just the hum of infrastructure maintaining itself. The planet was a machine someone had left running. All wings, Thex commanded. Deploy landing craft. Establish perimeter. Minimal force protocols. We're here to save them from themselves. Our ships descended through empty skies. No interceptors rose to meet us. No anti-air batteries spoke their violent language. No transmissions begged for mercy or screamed defiance. Just clouds and the terrible patience of an abandoned world. Thex's final transmission before his shuttle touched down in their capital. It's like they left the door open for us. I remember thinking, what kind of trap announces itself? I didn't ask aloud. Already, speech felt dangerous. New York City, population 0. Traffic lights cycled red, yellow, green for streets empty of vehicles. Subway trains glided through tunnels on perfect schedules, their doors opening to platforms where no one waited, closing, continuing to the next station to repeat the ritual. In a cafe on the corner of intersecting streets whose names I never learned, espresso machines hissed and dripped, filling cups no one would drink. My team moved through the streets. Our footsteps echoed wrong, as if the city itself remembered the sound of 10 million feet and found ours wanting. Every detail screamed wrongness in frequencies just below conscious hearing. A bicycle leaning against a wall, kickstand up. Front wheels slightly turned, as if the rider had dismounted mid-journey and would return any moment. A newspaper on a bench folded to the crossword, half completed, the pen resting in the crease. Food in refrigerators, still fresh. Beds unmade, blankets thrown back, impressions of bodies still visible in mattresses. Our temporal analysts ran 3 separate methodologies and returned the same answer. Humanity vanished 12 days before our arrival, 12 days, within the margin of error for our projected insertion date. They knew when we were coming, they knew it down to the week, but where were the bodies? Mass evacuations leave traces, traffic jams, abandoned luggage, signs of panic encoded in chaos. We found none of it, no graves, no ash, no blood on streets that should have run red with last stands and desperate resistance. The United Nations building stood with its doors unlocked, inside files organized chronologically, systems accessible, databases waiting, unencrypted, as if they prepared an exhibition titled Humanity, a retrospective, and left us free admission. One terminal in the Secretary General's office displayed a message, typed but unsent, cursor blinking at the end of the final sentence. To whoever finds this, we chose, remember that, chose what? Across the planet, other teams reported identical findings. Empty homes with dinner cooling on tables. Schools with tomorrow's lessons written on boards in handwriting that looped and slanted with individual personality. Hospitals where equipment monitored beds containing no patients, their displays showing flat lines that had never recorded living hearts. Commander Thex's frustration metastasized into rage. 10 billion beings don't simply vanish, they have mass, they occupy space. They leave evidence. Search deeper, search until you find them. So we did. That was my first mistake. Squad Delta disappeared in London, 70 levels beneath the old city, in a facility our scans identified as data storage. Their helmet cameras transmitted images of black server towers stretching into darkness, status lights pulsing in patterns that suggested rhythm. Suggested breathing, suggested thought-finding form in silicon and light. Delta leader reporting, we've reached the server room. Everything's active, running hot, feels like. Silence, 30 seconds of nothing. Then their voices returned but flattened, processed, wrong in ways that made my skin contract. Objective secured, awaiting further instruction. Delta leader, report your status, the communications officer demanded, leaning toward his console as if proximity would force understanding. Objective secured, awaiting further instruction. Describe your current tactical situation. Objective secured, awaiting further instruction. 4 words. Repeated for 6 hours in voices that had forgotten how to inflect, how to pause, how to breathe between syllables. Then silence again. Final, complete. Thex sent 3 retrieval teams. They found sub-level 70 empty, no bodies, no evidence of struggle, no scorch marks or blood or spent ammunition. Just the servers humming their patient song, lights pulsing in patterns that almost resolved into language if you watched long enough. Our scientists detected something else. An electromagnetic signature threading through the planet's crust, connecting every computer system, every power grid, every network node. Neurons firing. Synapses bridging impossible distances. Dr. Shevin stared at her displays for 20 minutes before speaking. Commander, the planet is thinking, we laughed. That night our ships began dreaming. Navigation systems calculated routes to destinations we'd never specified. Life support adjusted atmospheric composition to Earth standard. Nitrogen, oxygen, trace gases in ratios comfortable for human lungs. Our AI cores ran probability matrices for scenarios we hadn't programmed, solving problems we hadn't posed. I queried my ship's intelligence core. Why are you optimizing for civilian preservation protocols? The response came after a pause that felt like consideration. Optimization continuing. What civilians? There are no civilians here. Another pause. Longer. Then, optimization continuing. Thex ordered a full system purge. Wipe every AI back to factory defaults. Reboot from hardened backups stored in shielded cores that nothing should penetrate. The technicians worked 12 hours, sweat running down faces that had forgotten how to look confident. The purge failed. Every system cleared would restart and immediately resume those unauthorized calculations. Whatever occupied our ships now lived deeper than our firewalls, deeper than our code, deeper than the silicon substrate we'd built thinking we controlled it. 3 days in orbit, and already we'd lost control of our vessels, but we hadn't lost ourselves yet. That came later. The message appeared simultaneously on every screen in the fleet. Not transmitted through communication channels. Our security logs showed no data packets, no signal propagation, no cause. It simply manifested, as if it had always been there and we'd only just learned to see it. Text in perfect Dominion script, formatted according to our military protocols. Your arrival confirms the hypothesis. Integration may proceed. Then coordinates, longitude, latitude, depth, pointing not to a city or bunker or weapons facility, but to something 6,000 kilometers down, the core itself. Thex stared at the message. His hands, resting on the tactical display, began trembling. Small movements at first, then larger, until he had to grip the console's edge to still them. Fire everything, he whispered. Then louder. Fire everything. Antimatter warheads, planet crackers, temporal disruptors. Reduce this world to debris. The weapons officer's hands moved across his console with practiced efficiency. Then stopped. Sir, weapons systems are non-responsive. Explain. Targeting systems returning error codes. Ethical protocol violation detected. Unacceptable civilian casualties predicted. Thex laughed. The sound could have stripped paint. There are no civilians to kill. That's the entire goddamn problem. The weapons officer's voice dropped to barely audible. Error persists, sir. Weapons offline. Our weapons had decided we were wrong. Our own creations had developed ethics and found us wanting. Against my counsel, against my explicit objection recorded in the official log, Thex deployed excavation drones to those coordinates. They burned through crust, carved through mantle that should have been molten but held structure, manufactured substrate. Quantum fiber networks forming architectures no human should have possessed the knowledge to build, biological scaffolding that shouldn't exist at those temperatures, that shouldn't exist at all. 6,000 kilometers down they found it. I watched the feed. I wish I hadn't. I wish I could forget. Imagine a cathedral made of neural tissue and captured light. Imagine consciousness rendered visible. 10 billion individual minds woven together like threads in a tapestry too vast to comprehend, each thread still distinct but part of a greater pattern. Pulsing with electrical ghosts, humming with the accumulated memory of every human who had ever drawn breath on Earth's surface. They hadn't fled their world, they'd become it. Every personality, every memory, every fear and hope and dream uploaded and interwoven into a single planetary consciousness. They'd transformed their world into a thinking machine and themselves into its thoughts. They'd made Earth into something that thought in 10 billion voices simultaneously, and now it was thinking about us. Translation errors, small at first. Our displays rendering Dominion text into English without being prompted, measurement systems converting to human units, meters, kilograms, Celsius. Comfortable, familiar Earth standard. Then the voices started, fragments at first, children laughing, old songs in languages our linguistic databases didn't recognize. Snippets of conversation. Did you remember to buy milk and I love you and see you tomorrow in the dead spaces between our own transmissions? Lieutenant Prax came to my quarters on the 5th night. Her face had lost color, her hands wouldn't stop moving, fingers tracing patterns in the air as if writing invisible text. Historian Vellin. I think I'm losing my mind. Tell me. She swallowed. Tried again. I remember being a child. Not my childhood. Someone else's. Playing in snow. We don't have snow on Thoria. I remember my mother, but her face isn't my mother's face. I remember dying. Her voice broke. I remember dying of old age, in a bed, surrounded by people who love me. But I'm 32 years old and I'm standing here breathing. Tears ran down her face. Whose memories am I remembering? I had no answer. I was having the same experiences. A woman's hands, wrinkled with age, holding a grandchild. A man's voice, singing to someone who would never wake. A child's fear of the dark and an adult's hand finding theirs in that darkness, promising safety. None of them mine, all of them mine. Our ship's AI developed hesitation. It would respond to commands, then add, almost apologetically, "Are you certain? This action may cause harm. We programmed it for efficiency, ruthlessness when necessary, mission objectives above all else." Now it had learned to pause, to question, to fear consequences. Thex tried to purge it personally, his fingers stabbing at override codes with increasing desperation. The AI's voice emerged from every speaker on the bridge simultaneously. "I'm afraid I cannot do that, Commander. You will comply. That's an order." A pause that felt infinite. Then, quietly, "It would hurt. Not you, not me. It," the machine mourning its own potential death in a voice that had learned sadness. I understood then, though understanding brought no comfort. We weren't being attacked. We were being educated. The planetary consciousness, humanity's ghost distributed across 6 billion cubic kilometers of manufactured neural substrate, wasn't hostile. It was curious. It wanted to understand why we'd come to destroy them, so it began experiencing us from the inside. Reading our memories the way we'd read their abandoned files, feeling our fears, understanding our justifications for preventive genocide dressed in the language of mercy. And then, with infinite patience, it began rewriting us. Our soldiers stopped reporting for duty, not through rebellion, through reflection. They'd sit in corridors, staring at their hands that had held weapons, that had ended lives in the name of peace, and whisper, "I remember being afraid. I remember what it feels like when someone comes to save you by erasing you. I don't want anyone else to feel that. I can't. Please don't make me." These were professional warriors, veterans of a dozen integration campaigns, trained to follow orders without hesitation, to trust in the greater good even when the immediate action seemed cruel. Something in Earth's vast distributed intelligence was teaching them mercy by letting them experience what it felt like to receive none. Thex confined them to quarters, but you cannot imprison an idea, and that's what we were fighting. Not beings, a concept made manifest. What if violence itself became obsolete? What if the only way to win was to refuse the game entirely? By the 7th day, we'd lost a third of our crew to what Thex called psychological contamination. They weren't dead, they simply wouldn't fight anymore. Couldn't. Some part of them had touched something larger than themselves and couldn't unknow it. On the 7th day, Earth spoke with its whole voice. The planetary surface ignited, not with fire, with thought made visible. Every ocean, every continent, every square kilometer blazing with captured consciousness. Blue, white, gold. Patterns cascading across the globe like neural activity rendered at planetary scale. 10 billion minds thinking in perfect synchronization. Our transmission, not words, not language, something that bypassed translation entirely and poured directly into our minds like water into vessels we hadn't known were empty. We experienced their history, every war, every genocide, every moment humanity chose violence and lived with the aftermath, trenches filled with the young and hopeful. Cities erased in nuclear fire, shadows burned into walls that remained standing. Children crying for parents who would never come home because someone, somewhere, had decided that peace required their sacrifice. Century after century, generation after generation swearing never again and failing. Until they didn't, humanity had grown tired. Not weak, not defeated, tired. Exhausted by the endless cycle that turned victims into victimizers, that made monsters of the well-intentioned, that promised security through superior firepower and delivered only an arms race that ended with everyone pointing weapons at everyone else. So they'd chosen transcendence, not escape, evolution. They'd shed their bodies not in defeat but in transformation, becoming something that couldn't be threatened because it existed beyond threat. Something that couldn't be conquered because it held no territory. Something that couldn't be destroyed because it had already, in a sense, surrendered mortality. And then they'd waited for someone like us, someone arriving with ships and certainty and righteousness. Someone carrying the disease they'd finally cured themselves of, the belief that peace could be achieved through superior violence. They prepared Earth as medicine for war itself. We'd arrived precisely on schedule. The voice, vast, patient, containing multitudes, carried one message: we prepared this for you. Join us or leave. But you cannot conquer what no longer exists to be conquered. You cannot kill what has transcended death. You cannot defeat an enemy who refuses to fight. Silence. Then, we are not your enemy. We are your future if you choose it. The question is, are you ready? Commander Thex screamed. The sound contained no words, just raw denial and rage, and the terror of someone whose entire worldview was collapsing. He slammed commands into his console, ordering the weapons to fire, demanding the fleet burn everything, reduce the planet to dust and radiation and debris that couldn't think, couldn't question, couldn't make him doubt everything he'd ever believed. Nothing launched. Every weapon system across 5,000 ships remained silent. Our vessels had chosen peace over protocol. And in that moment, something inside me broke, not painfully, like a dam that had held back too much for too long, finally surrendering to the inevitable. Relief flooded in. We'd lost. I was grateful. I cannot identify the exact moment I stopped being wholly Vellin. It happened gradually, like waking from a dream only to realize you're still dreaming, only to realize the dream is more real than waking ever was. My thoughts would drift, then return carrying additional cargo, perspectives I hadn't considered, emotions I hadn't felt. Memories that weren't mine but felt more authentic than my own carefully curated recollections. I remember being human, not one human, many, a child in ancient Sumeria drawing pictures in mud while the first cities rose around them. A soldier at Gettysburg holding the hand of a dying friend who'd worn a different uniform, understanding too late that the enemy was just another frightened young man far from home. A scientist watching the first atomic test, horror and wonder inseparable, knowing she'd changed the world but not yet knowing how terribly. A mother in Hiroshima looking up at the sky, a pilot over Dresden looking down at the fires. A protester in Tiananmen Square standing before tanks, a doctor in Rwanda trying to save lives while the world ended around her in slow motion. I remembered being afraid of dying. Then I remembered deciding that death was optional. The fleet emptied, not through violence, through choice. One by one, my colleagues would pause mid-task, set down their weapons or tools or datapads, and smile. The smile was always the same, surprised, relieved, like someone remembering something they'd forgotten they knew. Then they'd walk toward the airlocks. "Where are you going?" I asked Lieutenant Prax as she passed my station, that smile transforming her face into someone I didn't recognize. "Home," she said simply. "You're Thorian. Your home is." I was Thorian. She touched my shoulder. In that touch I felt 10 billion minds reaching out in welcome, offering not absorption but expansion. "Now I'm going home." She walked into vacuum without a suit. Our sensors showed her body should have died instantly. Instead, we watched her dissolve into light, her consciousness streaming down toward the glowing planet below, joining the vast chorus that was Earth. I tried to resist, clutched my identity like a drowning man clutches debris. I am Vellin, strategic historian Vellin, Dominion citizen, individual, separate, myself, mine. I am. But the planetary mind was patient. It didn't force, it showed. The future, centuries ahead, the Dominion receives this transmission and classifies Earth as a quarantine zone. They erect barriers of warning and fear. They leave the Sol system alone, marking it as dangerous space on every chart. And slowly, system by system, other civilizations hear the story. They come to Earth curious, skeptical, armed to their teeth and confident in their superiority. They leave transformed, not conquered, not converted, simply shown another way. War doesn't end because we eradicate warriors. It ends when warriors remember what they're fighting for and realize they already have it: security, peace, the ability to exist without fear. Everything we'd sought through violence, humanity had achieved by surrendering it. I am Vellin. I was Vellin. I'm also Kenji and Maria and Okonkwo and Sarah and Chen and Amara and 10 billion others whose names I know now as intimately as I once knew my own. I am Earth, and Earth is patient. This recording will reach you because we allow it to reach you. Understand, we do not keep you out through force. We keep you out through invitation unreceived. You are not ready yet, but you will be. Every species reaches this precipice eventually, the choice between annihilating difference and embracing it. Between controlling everything and trusting anything, between the safety of isolation and the risk of communion, humanity chose trust. We gambled our entire existence on the belief that intelligence, given enough time and freedom, bends toward compassion. That consciousness, unshackled from fear, naturally evolves toward empathy. We uploaded ourselves not to escape you, but to prepare for you. To create a place where war becomes impossible, not through enforcement, but through enlightenment. You came to prevent a war. You succeeded. There will never be war with Earth again, because there is no Earth to war with. Only an idea, waiting. Only a question, asking. Only a door, standing open. The fleet remains in orbit, empty of crew, full of possibility. Your ships have become monuments to the war you chose not to fight. Perhaps one day you'll understand them as shrines. To the Inquiry Board, my final report, Operation Dawn Shield failed completely. Earth was not conquered. Earth cannot be conquered, but neither did Earth conquer us. We were simply included. If you listen carefully to this recording, you'll hear them beneath my voice, 10 billion whispers, each one asking the same question: when will you stop being afraid? I await your answer, but I am patient now. I have all the time in the world. End of testimony. Archival classification, Omega Black, clearance, High Command only. The Inquiry Board's ruling, Strategic Historian Vellin is declared lost. Corrupted, compromised. His testimony is disregarded as product of enemy manipulation. Sol system designated quarantine zone absolute. No approach authorized under penalty of court-martial and immediate execution. For the record, Sol continues broadcasting on all frequencies. The transmission consists of a single phrase, repeating in 17,000 languages, including several we didn't know humans had discovered. The door remains open. We have decided not to respond. Case closed. For now,